Welcome back to the channel, guys, and in this episode I'm going to be breaking down the nitty-gritty of how much profit you're actually going to make in your next property investment. And people get this wrong all the time, and a load of you have been asking about this. For those that don't know me, my name is Jamie York. I've been investing in property for the better part of a decade now, and I've built this channel to give you free content 3 days a week on how you can build a successful property portfolio. And if you want to help me out in return, the law of reciprocity, if you could just do me a favor and lightly tap the like button, that would help me immensely. So let's jump straight in. So when we're working out the returns, people talk about a lot of different things: gross yield, net returns, ROCE, abundance, corporate entities, tax structures, capital gains. Well, what's right? And actually it really comes down to a simple 4-letter acronym: ROCE. Now, a lot of people, well, most people, when you talk to them, they'll talk about yield. Yield, just so you know, is the purchase price of the property, the gross rent, and then divide the gross rent by the purchase price. And it's not really an accurate indication of what you're going to earn. So what is ROCE? Well, ROCE equals EBIT over capital employed. This, in my opinion, is the most accurate way to work out what your returns are going to be. And I know it can seem a little bit complicated. So let's just break it down a little. We'll just put this up here. So EBIT is earnings before interest and tax. Okay. That's as simple as it is. Your earnings before interest and tax. And what this earnings breaks down to is really your net rental income and capital gain. So I'm going to break that down further. Don't worry about that. And we're going to break down the reality versus predictions that we're going to break down on your next property investment. So when you're looking at your earnings before interest and tax, you need to understand what actually comes off of your earnings in the first place. And this is where it gets a bit more accurate. So let's say you're going to get, just as an example, £500 rent. Now, if you're going to get £500 rent, that's £6,000 a year. So by timesing that by 12, you're going to get a figure of £6,000 per annum. Is that your earnings? No, it's not. Okay, and that's really important because a lot of people go, yeah, I make £6,000 a year from my property. No, you don't. So you're going to have your mortgage, you're going to have your voids, you're going to have your maintenance, you're going to have your management, you're going to have your accountancy fees on your business if you're using an accountant, and a lot more. Okay, so that £6,000 might become a lot less once you do, well, it will become a lot less once you start deducting them. And this is where people screw up all the time. They think they're going to get into property, have no issues, no voids, no maintenance, no issues going on, and actually they end up quitting. Whereas if you can have a more reasonable outlay, and I'll go through what is reasonable in a moment, you're much more likely to be successful within the property sector. The next part is capital employed. Now, a simple way of thinking of capital employed, because I know it can sound a bit more technical, is what cash are you putting into the property? Okay, and that is before refinance and post refinance, i.e. before and after. A lot of people I've seen in the comments of my videos go, what is refinance? A refinance is the same as remortgage, i.e. when you buy a property and you buy it with a mortgage, you might refurbish the property, and later, it could be 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, you might get the property revalued at a higher price because it's gone up in value, and then you get a new loan or a mortgage, and then that is a remortgage. So you get more cash back. And I'll break that down in an example. And that's as simple as it is. Return on capital employed equals earnings before interest and tax divided by capital employed. So let me give you a real world example of this. So let's go with £100,000 property. We're gonna buy a £100,000 property. Does that mean you're putting in £100,000? No, it doesn't. So first of all, you're going to get a mortgage. A buy-to-let mortgage is typically 75% loan to value. What that means is you need to put in 25% as a deposit. So these are going to be very rough figures, but you're going to have 25,000 deposit. Then you're going to need your stamp duty. Stamp duty at that level is around 3%. So that's going to be £3,000. Let me just put stamp on that. On top of stamp duty, you're going to have legal fees, brokers. Let's call it 1,500. We'll just put legals there, but also your broker fee. I've got videos breaking this down in much more detail. And let's just say roughly a refurbishment of, I don't know, let's just say 11,000 to make it easy. That might make sense in a moment. Well, actually, let's say 10,500 to make it easy. That's your refurb. Now, if I've done that right in my head, 25, 28, 29, 30, 40,000. That's £40,000 cash that you need in order to purchase and refurbish this property. So let's say that is your cash in. That is also known as your capital employed. Now, let's say on that, we're just going to make this very easy. Let's say it's rented out at £700 a month. £700 a month on that property is £8,400 a year. Then you've got your mortgage, maintenance, voids, etc. to take off. Let's say there's £4,400 worth of costs. So let's say you're making £4,000 net before tax per year. Okay, that's just to make it easy. So we're going to say net rental is equal to £4,000. So let's work this out right now. The return on capital employed is equal to the £4,000 divided by the capital employed, which is £40,000. Now, if you use your calculator and you do 4,000 divided by 40,000, you're going to come up with 0.1. Okay, now represented as a percentage, that is 10% return on capital employed. Now, that is the most safe figure as a comparison. Why do I like using that? Well, I think it's the most comparable to if I had my money in the bank. Now, as you've heard me say before, in the bank you're getting 0. Fuck all right now. But if you compare your 0.1%, or even if you said 1% very ambitiously in the bank, a direct comparable is this figure here. So do you want to make 1%, Mr. and Mrs. Investor, or do you want to make 10%? What do you want to do? Now, often at this point, the investor will say, or I'll say to the investor, how many do you want to buy? Okay, but that's not it with property. The cool thing on top of leverage is capital growth. So I want to break down how we're going to predict the real rate of return, the ROCE over a period that we're going to look to achieve. Okay, so now we've got the most accurate prediction of that. Now, you decide how conservative you want. Just to give you an idea, I usually do 10% for long-term voids, 10% for long-term management, and then anything that comes in between. But it really depends on you, and you can watch my other videos on that. And hopefully, well, I'll tell you what, we'll put a link to one of those videos at the end of this that you can watch to accompany this. But what about capital growth? Now, you may have heard people saying, you know, every 10 years the property market doubles in value. Now, that strictly speaking is true, but I like to take a more conservative measure to take account of possible capital growth. So this is what I would call your safe prediction. Okay, now bear in mind it is a prediction because it is property. You're not buying a packet of crisp here. Things can go wrong, and if it can, it will in property. Okay, so that's a safe prediction. What about a reasonable? So my reasonable prediction will include capital growth. Here's what I do in order to predict 5 years worth of capital growth. Now, in my area, we've actually had 8 or 9% capital growth over the last few years in West Yorkshire in the areas that I'm investing. But what I like to do is I deduct 2% of the last 5-year average. Now, it's important to note that the past is not a prediction of the future, but it is an indication. Or I should say it's not a guarantee of the future, but it is a strong indication. So for example, let's say the last 5 years, there's been an average of 7% capital growth per annum. The way you can do this, by the way, is look at a few properties in your area on Zoopla, sold, and then you can see the history over a 5-year and 10-year period. And you can see the average capital growth, and it will depend on area, and it'll also depend on property type. A detached property in your area will have a different level of capital growth compared to flats in your area, and it can change over time. So what we're going to do is we're going to deduct 2% on that. We want to be conservative, if anything, okay? So we've got 5% capital growth. And then what I'm going to do is, you have to bear in mind that's compounding as well. So each year it compounds up. So if we start with that 100,000 in this example, and we go year 1, year 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're going to get the long term. And this is how I'm predicting the medium to long term capital growth in that area. Okay, so we're obviously going to have 105,000, 110,250, 115,762 £50, 121,550, and 127,628. And no, I didn't do that in my head. I wish I did. I've got a calculator. So this is what we're looking at, and bear in mind, so people go, oh, £5 a year on this, right? Well, no, because it grows only slightly. But if you look at the difference from here, that's £5 difference, and this is the power of compounding, the 8th wonder of the world, right? But if you look at this last year, 4 to 5, you can see there's about £6,000 difference. That might not sound like that big of a jump, 5 to 6,000, but within 5 years, that 5% growth is actually 20% higher in real terms after between year 4 and 5 compared to 1 and 2. Imagine that over the growth of a portfolio. So what we do is we minus this number by this number. So 127,000 by 100,000, which is the 27,628. Now this is where it gets interesting. I'm going to rob this workings off so we can add it all together now. Now this is where property really takes over any asset class. So grab your pen and paper. You're going to want to concentrate for this bit. So remember, we've got, this is over a 5-year period. We've got the capital growth, which is 27,628. That's capital appreciation. Predicted, not guaranteed, as with any investment. You've also got the rental returns. Now, what we're not going to take account of is rental increases in prices, which also happens over time, but I think it's just adding a layer of complexity that's not needed. So let's say you've got that 4,000. Bear in mind, we've already taken account of maintenance and all of that, so we're going to put that into a separate account. So we've got 4,000 times the 5 years, another £20,000. That's your rent. So what we're going to have here, add those together, we've got £47,628. Okay, Jamie, that's a cool figure, but what does it mean? Well, what we're now going to do is divide that by 5, and that should give us a fairly accurate mid-term representation of the real return on our investment. So I'm going to grab the calculator for this. So if we divide that by the 5 years, we've got £9,525 and 60 pence if you want to be pedantic. Okay, so now, again, bear in mind, capital growth is not guaranteed. But now we're looking at that earnings before interest and tax as an average down to 1 year. This is where you get a bit more sophisticated. Bear in mind, this is just an average property here. Okay, you can get much better properties if you've got the time and dedication. And we're going to divide that by our £40,000. Okay, now by that 40,000, which remember is the capital employed at the start of that, that's going to give you 0.238. Timesing that by 100 to get your percentage is 23.8% return on capital employed. Now again, this is what I would call your reasonable prediction, okay? Bear in mind, if you want your safe prediction, I'd just base it on the rent. This is kind of like the rental one. The first one is your cake, and this for me is your icing on the cake. But when you look at this as a reasonable situation here, it's a terrible color, a reasonable situation here to achieve this, that's not much better, is 23.8%. That is a really solid return on capital employed. The final thing that I would be like, wow, this is just icing on the cake, if you are just one of those greedy bastards that like smashing it in as much as possible, that sounded more appropriate in my head, I won't lie, is when it comes to the refinance. Now imagine at this level, okay, so if you've got that property that's worth 127,000 and then you refinance that, what that means is you have got a new 75% loan to value on that. So remember before you had 75 grand's worth of debt because of on 100,000. If you do 75% of 127,000, or to make it easier, let's say 120,000, so I can actually do it in my head and not look like a knob trying to work it out, that's going to be 90 grand mortgage. So what that's going to mean is the first 75,000 pays off the other mortgage, and those can be confusing the first time if you've heard this, and then there's 15 grand that's left in there, okay? Sorry. So you put 15 grand in your pocket. So now what you've got is, instead of 40,000 of your cash put in, you've just got another 15 grand left. So now you've only got 25,000 pounds. If you then do the 9,000 whatever it is divided by the 25 grand left in, suddenly your return on capital is closer to 35% now. And you've got added equity, and that growth just gets better and better and better over time. Now, are there risks in property? Of course there are. You need to understand the reality of the problems that come up. I'm sorry to say, every now and then a tenant's going to trash your property just when you thought you were making profit. In the middle of winter, the boiler will go down. Of course it's not going to go down in summer. Right on bloody Christmas Day it will go, and all of these issues. But if you can predict the reality of property, not this bullshit that people put out that you're just going to be reeling it and quit your job next month, you can really build up a sustainable level of wealth over time. And that's what I'm really excited by. The final thing I want to leave you with, and this is a big one, is the difference between net and net. So what is net and net, I hear you saying? I can't hear you because this is a pre-recorded video. But net or net. Ooh. Okay, they sound like really similar things, and tax is the most boring thing in the world, but I promise you, you need to learn to think of tax as the most sexy thing you've ever come across. I know it's hard to imagine. Net is your net in your pocket before your tax. Net, the other T on the end, means taking account of your tax. Now, I'm not going to deep dive around this. I'm actually going to do a separate video on the tax within property, but you need to think about your tax structure, especially if you're a higher income earner and you're paying tax at 40%. You're going to want to think about incorporating and having your properties in a company, which I'll talk about in another video. But I just want to talk you through the power of compounding with this. So you may have heard of the 1 penny. Okay, and you go and you double a penny every day for 30 days. So it becomes 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512 and onwards. So you think, okay, well, yeah, that's 512 pence, whatever. However, by day 30, I always ruin this and get the figure wrong, but you're around, give or take a million, about £4 million. Okay, now if you don't believe me, genuinely get a spreadsheet, or just go 1 times 2 equals. Now, are you going to get 100% return a day? No, so it's not that important. But what is when you compare the power of compounding there, amazing magician trick, right? But what people forget is the horrible part of compounding when it comes to tax, because it compounds the other way. So, for example, let's say on this side you've got £4 million. Okay, Okay, compounding is an absolute beaut, by the way, like absolutely incredible. You've got 4 million there, okay? But what happens if you're taxed at 30%? Fairly standard tax, right? So instead of 1p becoming 2 pence, you get taxed 30% on the extra 1 pence. So you get 1.7 pence and so on. How much do you think you've got at the end? Some of you might be going, 3.5 million. What about 3.2? If you're getting 4 there, what about 2.8? No, you are left with roughly £48,000. Seriously, work it out. Instead of saying times 2, do 1 times 1.7 30 times, or grab a spreadsheet and grab it down. I'm going to go through tax in another video, but really embrace the difference between net with 1 T and net with 2 T's. And there's several ways that you can look at saving money, because making a multiplying is just 2 of the trifecta effect of building your wealth. So get a great tax accountant, not just the average one, tax accountant that understands property investment and mitigating your tax. Make sure to think strategically about your tax before you throw yourself into property investment. And probably the most important and safest thing you can do of all is subscribing to this channel, smashing the notification bell, and of course, if you got value from this video, smashing the like button and letting me know what you thought about this video in the comments. For those that got value, I hope to see you in my next video, which is coming up here.